every single bit of research that I engage in, it's about understanding, okay, how do I actually, do less, frankly, and really just understand, what do I actually need to focus on that's going to help me be more present, more engaged, more at peace, frankly, which are really my only goals in life. What are the behaviors I can adopt that get me closer to that?
This is Andrew Vance, and you're listening to Choose the Hard Way, where I explore lessons learned at the limits of human experience with top performers from tech, business, the arts, science, the military, and many other disciplines. Go to choosethehardway.com to sign up for our newsletter. And if you enjoy this episode, please subscribe and give us a 5-star rating in the iTunes store. If you'd like to suggest a guest or be in touch, you can email me at choosethehardway@gmail.com or reach me on Instagram at hardwaypod. There aren't shortcuts or hacks on the road to becoming the best. You are what you overcome. Choose the hard way. Kristin Holmes is the Vice President of Performance Science at Whoop. She works with top researchers and hundreds of the best tactical, pro, and collegiate athletes and teams in the world to optimize training, recovery, and sleep. Kristin was a 3-time All-American and 2-time Big Ten Athlete of the Year at the University of Iowa, competing in both field hockey and basketball. She was a 7-year member of the U.S. national field hockey team and one of the most successful coaches in Ivy League history, having won 12 league titles in 13 seasons and a national championship at Princeton University. Kristin is a leading mind in the fields of high performance and recovery. I've learned a great deal from her work and the conversations that we've had, so I'm excited to finally have her on the show and to share this interview with you. The best place to follow Kristin is on LinkedIn. You can find that link in the show notes. I don't think I'm going to get any more interruptions related to Legoland. However, the gale force winds and window rattling continues. So it might be like the musical Stomp. We'll have like my rattling window. We might have some Songbird, and then we'll see if we can get some Slack notifications. And then it'll be like a Neil Peart drum solo. So
perfect.
Yeah, totally. So I think just to kind of kick things off, how did you end up where you are right now? It's a very broad question, but like, what led you to what you do?
Yeah, so I was always really interested in technology as a way to foster human performance. So I always thought there was a huge opportunity there. So when I was coaching at Princeton University, I was there for 13 seasons. As kind of my time there progressed, I realized there was a real competitive advantage to be had to really understand how athletes were adapting or not adapting to the load I was putting on them. And so I really started going pretty deep down the rabbit hole to try to quantify, what was happening during our training sessions. What led me to Whoop is I realized that pretty quickly that there seemed like there was very little correlation between what I was doing in training and in games to next day capacity. So I think as a coach, any coach worth their salt is really trying to understand, how do I train athletes to get them as fit as they can be to, be able to adapt to game stress in the most functional way possible, right? Without, getting injured. So, and in order to kind of pack that, you have to understand how to apply load. So I was really trying to solve that mystery, right? And again, what I found out is that, the load that I was putting on in training and the load that they were, kind of incurring during games really had no direct correlation to how they showed up tomorrow. So really what it came down to is how they were eating, how they were drinking, how they were sleeping, how they were managing, stress in relationships. Like all of those things were way more influential on next day capacity than anything I could do in the hour or 2 hour block that I had with them. So that's really kind of ultimately what led me to Whoop. Is I started actually trying to develop my own technology at Princeton. I raised about $250,000 of funding and started building my Whoop doppelganger. It was called Actus. I hired a company in New York City to kind of help build the application. I hired statistical machine learning and computational biology, some PhD students at Princeton, and really started building kind of my own technology to just kind of solve for this 24/7 kind of problem almost, and really the whole goal of it was to try to help my student athletes understand how to how to get control of their behaviors away from the training facility to help them show up to the training facility with as much capacity as possible.
Sure.
Knowing, of course, in the data that there was no correlation between what I was doing on the field. I had literally, as a coach, it's like the worst moment. It's like I have like literally no control whatsoever over how they show up, because it doesn't matter how I train them really. If you're in a maintenance phase, obviously if you're in a functional overreaching phase where you're really trying to get fitter and push the envelope, then yeah, that could have, that's going to have some marginal effects on how someone shows up the next day. But generally speaking, it was really, I was trying to develop some technology to help them understand, how their sleep was contributing and helping to contributing to their capacity. How was, nutrition inputs? How was their hydration levels? How was, their, purpose, efficacy, control? I found ways to quantify that. Where did their behaviors align with the things that they said they valued? I built that into the app and was able to kind of quantify that relationship over the course of a day and then over the course of a week, just so they could ask better questions of themselves and direct their behavior in a more intentional way. So I was giving a lecture at Princeton, and someone came in down from the stands and I was talking about this technology I was building, and they said, "Have you met, Will Ahmed, the CEO of Whoop?" And I said, "No." And the guy was like, "Well, he's building like literally the exact same technology, and it seems like he's actually a lot farther along."
Perfect.
So I collapsed in a puddle of tears. And no, but very shortly after that, I met Will in New York City, and we just, obviously there's so many synergies between what I was thinking and what the problems I was trying to solve and things I was interested in thinking about, frankly. He offered me a job, and I joined about 5 years ago.
And I want to come back to that in a second, but I'm really curious, when did your interest in the intersection of technology and human performance begin? And just to share a personal anecdote, I was just thinking about this while you were talking. I think I got my first polar heart rate monitor in, I want to say 1989 or 1990. I was not an elite athlete. I often was near last place in my cross country races, and the applause were like, "Please finish the race," not "You're doing great." But I've had this interest since then in like, how can technology inform and enhance performance? Like, where did that start for you?
Yeah. My academic background is in, psychology and physiology. And so I've kind of always been interested in that just intersection. And I think, obviously on the psychological side, very hard to quantify. So I knowing that your physiology profoundly impacts your psychology, I was like, gosh, there needs to be more insight. There's more insight to be had here. And that's where I started digging into kind of heart rate, as in resting heart rate as a proxy to understand, how we were kind of coping with demands. And then I learned about heart rate variability. And that's when just the love affair began with just this idea of holy cow, there's this relationship between our autonomic nervous system and that's really the proxy to kind of help us understand how we're adapting to life demands. So I guess this is about, a decade and a half ago, I started digging into heart rate variability literature. And I think I was probably the first NC2A coach to actually use heart rate variability during games and as a way to, I was substituting off of EPOC and, I was doing things I think that I don't know, I don't know if really anyone's even doing that now. But so I really, again, I think the whole goal was to try to create the best possible experience for my student athletes and, help them have reach their potential. And I really saw that these were markers that we had to be tracking. So I think it really came, I think I started getting interested because I wanted to create the best possible experience for my student athletes. And then also as an athlete myself, we were getting into polar, we had polar chest straps and we were really getting into quantification. And our director of performance, who actually is now the director of performance for U.S. field hockey, David Hamilton, he was super forward thinking in this area. So I had the opportunity to interact with him a fair amount. He's actually now the director of performance for Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So no surprise that, there's a lot of reasons why they're winning, I'm sure, but I guarantee David has some sort of influence there, but he is just a real genius in all of this. So I was able to kind of learn about some of these mechanisms really before it was vogue and start to wrap my head around how I could apply it in a real practical way.
And it wasn't that long ago that to access this technology, it was like in the tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars. Like I remember, I don't know all the details, but I remember when I got like the first Omega Wave consumer unit, and there were a couple of other things like that, I think maybe a decade ago. But for people who aren't super dialed into this, what is the Whoop technology, and like what is HRV, and how can people apply it broadly?
Yeah, great question. And yes, it's very expensive. I remember going to at Princeton. I know there's a great endowment, but none of that really goes to athletics, or not a lot of it. So we had to raise always a ton of money. So I went to my board and remember kind of laying out this case of why we need to measure heart rate variability. And yeah, at the end, they ended up writing me a check for $25,000 to purchase this heart rate variability technology. So yeah, it's still really expensive, but yeah, Whoop, we've made it affordable. We've taken basically everything that you'd get from your chest strap and really, put it on the wrist, and you can access the technology and all of the insights for, I guess, $30 a month. So it's you're not really paying for the hardware, you're paying for this subscription. And with this subscription comes all sorts of benefits, in terms of feature and data insights. So yeah, that's kind of, And in terms of, do you want me to kind of go into the technology itself, or just I guess high level, like just
super high level, like what can people get out of it? I mean, I know that's like super broad, but what's the point of it?
Yeah, I mean, I think at a foundational level, like understanding how your body is adapting to life load is really important. And we've got the technology now that we don't have to guess, right? And I think what we've done at Whoop, I think in a really elegant way, is we've wrestled to the ground, what is actually fundamental to track, right? Like it's important to understand your cardiovascular load. We sum that up in a metric called strain. It's on a scale of 0 to 21. It builds throughout the day, so you can kind of see in real time, how your behaviors and activities, how you're perceiving the world, all that's going to manifest in your heart rate, and you can kind of see that build in real time over the course of the day. So you've got this concept of day strain and activity strain, and I think what is really unique about Whoop is that we separate them, right? Because they're not the same, right? But I think it's important, and I think this is the big value proposition to Whoop, is that understanding that what you're doing across the day is not trivial, right? Like it does add up, and it contributes either positively to your life or negatively. And to kind of have that quantified on a scale, I think is really a useful reference point. And then the other pillar we track is recovery. So understanding, what that load you put on your body actually did to you. And that's what recovery kind of helps you understand. It's on a scale of 0 to 100, loosely bucketed, in green, yellow, and red, and just helps you, again, understand how your body is adapting, to this external stimuli. The inputs that go into recovery are kind of these markers that I keep referring to that are really important. Heart rate variability. We measure your resting heart rate, your respiratory rate, and sleep. And all of those 4 inputs make up kind of the Whoop recovery algorithm. And I think what's important to note is that none of these markers independently have been shown to be more predictive of performance than they are together. So Whoop recovery itself is just a really good snapshot and more powerful than just pulling out our heart rate variability alone, or resting heart rate alone, or sleep alone, or respiratory rate alone. But actually the algorithm itself has been shown, to stand up to literally across every single discipline, from when we look at executive functioning, working memory, mental acuity, swim times, run times, free throw percentage, ice hockey efficiency, literally, you name it, Whoop will correlate to all of those those performance data and those and I could keep going in terms of disciplines, but so Whoop recovery itself is an extraordinary source of insight to help you understand, again, what the load, both acute, but I think more importantly, kind of that chronic load is kind of doing to you, and again, how you're adapting. And then finally, we look at sleep. So And, I can talk for days and days and days about sleep. I'm so passionate about it, but it's the most important behavioral experience we have as humans. And if you don't have your sleep right, you're just leaving so much on the table. And there's no person that could, there's just such a mountain of evidence to support that statement that it's, I think, indisputable. And I know we can kind of create a lot of stress around sleep, and that's not my intention, but I think it's worth spending all of your resources to sort out because of its relationship to not only just performance day to day, but, we look at long-term like disease, cardiovascular disease, metabolic disease. I mean, there's just a link, right, between disease and sufficient sleep or insufficient sleep. And we wrestle that around in a really powerful way.
A lot of things getting wrestled to the ground, and I want to like dig in on a couple of these things, like particularly the sleep component, breathing component, and then I forget how you characterize it, but just kind of like general life stress. But before we go there, could you just share a little bit about like what do you do in your job day to day? What's the scope of it, and like what are you overseeing?
Yeah, so I am on the product team. So really, what I try to do is I try to take external research that we can't. So we have a ton of research that we're able to do with our member data, right? So we're able to understand, based on various behaviors, we can look at how those behaviors correlate to the metrics that we're tracking. So there's a lot to learn there, and that can guide our feature development. One of those feature developments or updates would be, incorporating your menstrual cycle data into our sleep recommendations. Okay, so that's insight that we take from our member data, and we do research around that. We understand it, and then we, write a paper, we publish it, and the COVID respiratory rate, detection algorithm that we put together is another example of using member data to do internal research to drive feature production. What I kind of do is I look at other problems. I look at a problem. So we want to understand, for example, how do we mediate heart rate variability? That's a real pain point for our members. So, and what can we learn from our member data? There are definitely things that we can learn there. But what I'm looking at is, okay, what kind of research can we do with an external partner that can help us understand the behaviors, the underlying mechanisms, and then the behavior that our member can then grasp onto to influence the metrics that we're tracking. So I kind of spend a lot of time thinking about what those partners look like, help standing up the research, and oftentimes kind of as a principal investigator leading the research, and then building features. So I've really been working on that for really the last, I guess, year and a half. Before that, I was working on the enterprise team and doing a lot of the education, evangelizing, kind of so organizing our sales team to sell the product. So I've bounced around inside Whoop, but primarily I'm working on product things and doing research.
And how many studies are underway right now related to Whoop or the topics that you just shared about?
Yeah, so just last year alone, and that's really when I started in, 2020, with kind of being responsible for this research, and I stood up 19.
Wow.
Went through 19. Yeah,
Whoa,
good.
That's a lot.
Ethics. I know, insane. Yeah, and it spans 3 buckets. One is looking at cognitive measures. So really wanted to try to unpack, this, or be able to kind of show with Whoop that, there's a predictive element in the metrics that we're tracking, and to working memory and executive functioning, mental agility. I think that was really important. And that hopefully, in addition to kind of informing potential feature sets inside the product, it also is a sales enabler for us, right? Like we've always struggled kind of selling into the corporate space because, the person sitting at their desk is like, well, Whoop is for just elite athletes. Like, but it's no. If you're a human being and you don't understand heart rate variability, you're missing a huge opportunity, right? To really direct and own your health. So anyway, some of the research I'm doing too is to help our enterprise team have the kind of talking points they need to deal with some of the objections they see in some of these spaces. So that's kind of another point. But so cognitive measures is one kind of funnel I've been working on. Female physiology is another one. We have a lot more male members than we do female members, and there's probably a reason for that. Like, we've got it's a real alpha type of product and voice. How do we make it more attractive to female members? So stood up a huge study with 5 different collegiate institutions spanning 700 female athletes to just really try to understand a lot of different aspects to kind of the female and female physiology specifically. And then mental health and sleep was kind of the third bucket. And then the fourth bucket that emerged, of course, was COVID. So basically have 19 different studies going across those 4 buckets right now.
And have any of them reached a conclusion, or like, is there anything public facing that you can talk about, or is everything still kind of underway and under review?
Yep. We've got, well, one, I really wish I could talk about, I could say what, so Dr. Andrew Huberman, he's a neuroscientist from Stanford, really one of the preeminent thought leaders across kind of, he's ophthalmologist as well.
Yeah,
but
he's amazing. His work's amazing. I want to have him on the show. So if you're listening, Dr. Andrew Huberman, please come on.
So good. So I met him in October of 2019, and we became, kind of fast friends. And I was like, we must do research together. And so we have one that's actually in the final phase of analyses. So I could talk a little bit about that. It has to do with breathing protocols. There's no real kind of taxonomy of, understanding, different types of breath work and how they actually influence alertness or calmness. And, so that's something that we're trying to put some parameters around and some real scientific understanding.
Nice.
So that's the study that we have going. Yeah. And that relates, it's kind of in the mental health and sleep bucket, I guess, if you think about those 4 buckets that I identified and what we're trying to work toward. And then building some features around that, I think, would be the ultimate goal. Where was I? What was the main point?
I was just wondering, like, of the research that's underway, is there anything that you can talk about? Are there any learnings? And I'm also curious whether it's with that research or just since you've really been very deeply involved in this body of work, like, what have been like the most novel or interesting findings that like you've applied to your own practice around stress management and recovery?
Yeah, it's such a good question. Yeah, so we've got we're basically in the analyses phase of I think like 7 different studies at this point of the 19. So we're getting there. I can say that I think I can say that for calmness, the double inhale and long exhale has been something that I've been applying very consistently across my day because that has shown to really calm the nervous system.
What is that? Like what timing wise, like what's the count?
It's just basically whatever is a comfortable double inhale,
okay,
and then immediately followed by a longer exhale. So just ensuring that the exhale is longer than the inhale is the key there. And that's been shown to be the most efficacious kind of on-demand tool to mitigate stress. And you can do that, 10 times, 20 times. If you think about the level of stress you just incurred and kind of try to match that with the breathing, that's a good way of thinking about, stress mitigation in a very proactive way throughout the day. Because I think this is one of the things where, I mentioned just, we think about sleep often just as, oh, what's my pre-bed routine? And I think that's how we talk about sleep a lot. And folks who want to get better at sleeping, it's all about, lavender in the room and, doing the breath work right before bed. And all of that's really good. But actually, it's the stress accumulation throughout the day. That's what ends up actually fragmenting your sleep. So the degree that you can build in some of these tools in a proactive way throughout the day to, again, ensure that you're not building up stress. And then you get to a point where at the end of the day, there's no amount of breath work that's going to, make up for all the stress that just accumulated over the course of the last 12 hours. So it's really important that you're thinking about it in a real proactive way. And that's really the research that we're doing in this area is really about understanding, what actually is the science behind that. And that's probably what I can't reveal is the direct relationship between that particular kind of physiological psi is what that breathing technique is called, how that correlates to sleep efficiency. But there's a relationship, I guess I can say. And And that's definitely one of the learnings. I don't do a million different breathing techniques. I do the ones that, have been shown to actually move the needle the most. So I'm not having to do a million things. But
it sounds like a good idea.
Is a good one. Yes. It's all about how to apply your effort. And that's really every single bit of research that I engage in. It's about understanding, okay, how do I actually, do less, frankly, and really just understand, what do I actually need to focus on that's going to help me be more present, more engaged, more at peace, frankly, which are really my only goals in life. What are the behaviors I can adopt that get me closer to that?
That idea of edit to amplify or subtract to amplify is a very powerful one. And I think as it applies to breathing, I mean, you mentioned this technique, and I do have a specific follow-up, which is if someone is applying this PSI technique, they want to drop it in whatever throughout the day, because as you said, if you reach a certain point of stress accumulation, like it's a point of no return, it sounds like.
Yeah.
But is there a certain amount of time someone has to do it, or a certain number of breaths, or is that a secret to be revealed in a future study?
Yeah. I if we just think about it principally, it takes about 90 seconds for the vagus nerve to pick up on lung expansion and release a chemical called acetylcholine, which will basically tell your heart rate to slow down. Okay. So I would say 90 seconds is probably the bare minimum, given what I know of kind of the physiology there.
Okay. Because I've tried a number of different breathing techniques, as I'm sure many people have. Like everybody's trying to figure out, like, what's the magic, and I've read a lot about various people, professional athletes, people in the military using box breathing. Personally, when I do box breathing, I'm like, wow, my heart rate just went up like 20 beats per minute by the time I'm finished. Like, what am I doing wrong? Like my HRV is like 3% better, but sometimes worse. But I guess results may vary. I don't know.
Yeah. And we looked at box breathing as well. I think for calmness, I think the reviews are mixed on box breathing. I think, again, in principle, if you're looking to calm the nervous system, you want your inhale to be shorter than your exhale. Right. And that makes sense, right? Our inhale is when our heart rate is going to speed up. Our exhale is when our heart rate is going to slow down. So we're trying to create a dynamic with our heart where we're slowing the heart rate down, right? And we're to try to achieve that parasympathetic effect. So I think box breathing, can be good, but again, for some people, it's not necessarily, it doesn't necessarily have a calming effect that you're really after when you're doing breath work.
This is super divergent, but who was the best coach you ever had?
I would say probably Tracy Grisbaum, in terms of just like really, okay. So I've had different coaches had different types of skills. I would say from a technical perspective, Tracy Grisbaum was phenomenal. She was the assistant coach at University of Iowa when I was a student athlete there, went on to become the head coach. Just very effective communicator, super precise, never gave too much information. I think coaches can just talk way too much, and give so much information that there's no way an athlete could actually consume it and apply it. And she was just so perfect and never mincing her words and really like giving you the feedback that you need in the right moment to actually like make, actually change the technical aspect, of what you're doing. I feel like he's a very technical sport. So, and then I would say, Terry Walsh, he was our director of performance for U.S. field hockey. So I had a chance to coach with him and play under him. And he's just a visionary. I mean, the way that guy, he's Aussie, went to multiple Olympics and was just unbelievable leader, and understood the psychology and the physiology, and could just manipulate our team at will, it seemed. And so from a tactical perspective, I would say Terry Walsh was just absolutely off the charts in terms of just helping me understand the tactical side of the game.
Yeah, having that ability to deliver either, like being a visionary, inspiring people, and then also that ability to deliver right-sized information at the right moment so that it can be operationalized successfully and doesn't negatively impact someone's confidence. Like that's definitely like a real gift for a coach to have. So that makes a ton of sense.
Well said. Yeah.
And I mean, it's something that, like I see all the time in the work that I do with people around communication, like particularly when people are entering, I guess what you would call like competition, which is slightly different in the professional domain than the sporting domain. But when people are at a moment of high arousal, highly focused, if you do the wrong thing, you can wreck them, even if it's well-intentioned. And so you have to be, I mean, like you're a world-class coach. I don't need to tell you, but like, there's like definitely an art to doing that. A different kind of art that has nothing to do with coaching is taping one's own mouth shut while sleeping. And I know this has become super popular recently. I'm going to forget the name of the author, but all over the podcast.
James Nestor.
Yes, James Nestor. Yes. And he did a self-study that he funded. So I don't believe that there's a large body of research on this, but it was a novel enough idea. And anecdotally, I had a lot of friends reporting to me, hey, I'm seeing really great results with sleep quality with HRV. I gave it a shot. I've been doing it. My wife and children are very insistent that I stop this practice because they find it to be super weird and it freaks them out. Usually the first thing my 4-year-old son does in the morning is tears the tape off of my mouth. And he doesn't really care that I'm trying to get like really high quality rest. But what do you think about this practice? Is there anything to it? Is it a trend? Do I just think it's working? Like what's going on?
I think at this point there's like enough evidence to support that, breathing through the nose is definitely the path to, I think, health. We don't want to be breathing through our mouth for a number of reasons. But I mean, I could go into a little bit of the science if you want, but
please do.
So breathing through your nose is like, when we think about it from an evolutionary perspective, it's the way our bodies were like designed, right? And I heard this once and I thought it was like the best way, in that breathing through your mouth is about as practical as trying to eat through your nose.
Okay.
I thought that was like such a great, it's really, so in order to kind of breathe to your full capacity, you actually want to restrict your breathing. And by breathing through your mouth, you don't actually restrict your breathing. So by kind of decreasing your respiratory function, by breathing through your mouth, you actually decrease the energy levels in your body. So, this concept of wanting to get as much oxygen in the most efficient way possible that oxygenates your body, breathing through your nose is absolutely the path to that. And not to mention, like, there's just a lot of research on if you're breathing through your mouth, how that changes your jaw structure. It's, increases tooth decay. I mean, there's all sorts of things just from like a kind of, there's some really good literature on that. I'm trying to think of a couple of the authors right now, but I can ping you afterwards. But there's already some really good literature on just how breathing through your mouth, impacts the structure of your jaw. But yeah, I mean, that's just a couple nuggets. And it's also, I think, when we look at, hopefully there's going to be some more research on this, but to your point about breathing through your nose, and are you finding your data changes when you tape your mouth during sleep? I'd be interested to know your personal experience. Okay.
Yeah, for sure. Like when I started doing it, I think probably like I do use Whoop. I've shared that with you. I've used it for several years. I find it to be an incredibly valuable tool for a variety of reasons. And for me, I think one of the most important functions it serves is it draws my awareness and attention to my level of accumulated stress, fatigue, and whether or not I'm recovering appropriately. Because like almost everyone who's interested in being a high performer and trying to do that or actually doing it, I want to do everything possible to make that happen. And I know that sleep is like of utmost importance. Equally, no matter what intentions you have, whether you're a parent, you have a highly stressful job, like whatever, like there are a lot of things that can interfere with actually being able to control that. So for me, it's just that constant reminder of like, I might need to be up until, 11 or 1 doing thing X, but I know that I shouldn't be. And then it helps me to gravitate back towards the homeostasis I want to have, which is trying to get at least 8 hours of sleep. Because for me, I know that I'm low perform. If I'm under 6 hours, I'm like surviving. If I'm under 5, I'm almost non-functional. But when I tape, since I started mouth taping, I seem to be getting much more deep sleep, which was always something that concerned me. Like, whoa, like why do I have so much light sleep? And probably like many people, I can get a little neurotic around like, oh, my sleep's not good enough. What am I going to do? Like, I'm going to try to sleep better. But yeah, that's like one of the biggest changes I've noticed is just consistency of achieving big chunks of deep sleep, more REM sleep as well. And then obviously a decreased proportion of light sleep.
Yeah. And I think if you consider like to look at all the disorders of sleep, right? They stem from having your mouth open, right? Like snoring and sleep apnea. Like you can't snore and you can't have sleep apnea if you're sleeping with your mouth closed, right? So just like it is a marker of health, frankly, if you can actually breathe with your through your nose with your mouth shut as you sleep. And I think to your point, it's probably kind of the cheapest life hack you can deploy. That said, I'm not suggesting people tape their mouths. Like I think there's actually some medical devices that you can wear, but honestly, probably taping your mouth is more comfortable than any of those medical devices that are going to, force you to breathe through your nose. But yeah, I mean, I think, it's to your point, and I think we get this anecdotally across like hundreds and hundreds of members that, once they've made that change and are, starting to train themselves to breathe through their nose, they see a massive uptick in the time that they're spending in deeper stages of sleep and just the level of consolidation. I think the other piece to note is that if you're breathing through your mouth, like because your sleep is going to be more fragmented, and there's no way around that, right? That's we already know that this is a fact. You're going to experience a lot of daytime sleepiness, right? And a fluctuation in energy levels that is not great, and then that creates like other behaviors that are probably not as good, and maybe snacking when you shouldn't be snacking just because you're hungry and you're trying to get energy, or overuse of caffeine, which then influences your ability to fall asleep at night. So it does kind of create this vicious cycle. So yeah, I mean, I think if people are having problems sleeping, asking your partner, hey, do you notice, is my mouth open when I'm sleeping? I mean, if you wake up and your mouth is dry, that's another really good example of, hey, I'm probably, or an indicator that you're actually maybe breathing through your mouth. I would also recommend, actually during the day, just keeping your mouth closed. That's another
Absolutely.
way to kind of train it, and people, again, it's one of those things where you're not, it's hard to be conscious of, but honestly, I think taping your mouth during the day when you have those moments, if you find yourself with your mouth open, when you're not talking or eating or drinking, that could be a good way to just, again, help train yourself to breathe through your nose.
Yeah. I was going to say that's another thing that I don't know if I've noticed this, or again, it's just the behavior of taping my mouth shut and being conscious of it has drawn my attention to during the day. Am I breathing through my nose or am I breathing through my mouth? And anytime I catch myself, I just try to shift back to breathing through my nose because I notice I'm more relaxed and I feel like I'm therefore more effective because I'm calm. So,
have you noticed a change in your training?
It's interesting because like a lot of endurance athletes, my training, like I'm not the types of events I participate in and like the type of competition I engage in at this point requires a lot of very, very high intensity effort. I mean, the vast majority of it, like everything is aerobic, but because I have to go into these extreme modes of exertion, there's no way I can like use the math method and like just like breathing through my nose while I'm like 30% above my LT or whatever the case may be. But yeah, I try to be conscious of that. Like if I'm doing like a zone 1 recovery ride or something, I just like try to breathe through my nose the whole time. And that's the gating factor. If the effort forces me to start breathing through my mouth, I know I'm going too hard.
Nice.
Yeah. So,
Very cool.
yeah, but so like there's that. And then another just kind of like broad topic. And again, you touched on it earlier, but just this idea of all of the stress, physiological stress that you actually accrue throughout the day because of mental and emotional stress. Not necessarily something people think about when they think about their physiology, but it's just like so obvious at this point in history and research how deeply connected those things are. And it's not something all people think about, particularly, I think, potentially in like their professional life, they might not be thinking about that. But I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about that connection and how I know we've talked a little bit, or you've talked about mental performance, cognitive performance being impacted by some of the factors that the strap measures. So like what's going on there?
Yeah, I think what we don't realize is that, again, I think if we go back to kind of heart rate variability, right? And using that as just like a source of truth to understand how you're coping with external stress, right? So, and that's, not just training stress, but, all life stress, financial stress, relationship stress, like any stress that you can, that you would, incur over the course of the day that manifests in your autonomic nervous system, right? And heart rate variability is kind of basically a measure of how well your heart is responding to the inputs of the autonomic nervous system. Right, you've got the parasympathetic branch and the sympathetic branch are both competing to send signals to the heart. The more healthy and robust your heart is, the more responsive it will be to both inputs, both demands of that autonomic nervous system. So, I think again, as HRV is just a marker to kind of help us understand how we're going is awesome. I think when we consider what influences heart rate variability, that's a good way to kind of back up and take, go through just a mental checklist of what are the primary influencers of heart rate variability and how am I coping with those things? So we talked about sleep being on the physiological side, being a massive influencer on how we are able to adapt to our environment, right? And if we get really poor sleep, there's generally a pretty much a linear relationship between heart rate variability and sleep. So if we're sleeping really poorly, we would imagine like our heart rate variability will be quite low. This isn't the case 100% of the time, but most from a statistical standpoint, like you're going to find, a very strong relationship between insufficient sleep and low heart variability and heart variability. The other piece that's really important is obviously what are you putting in your body, your nutrition, right? And I think kind of at the highest level is, what is your, do you have a lot of variability in blood sugar, or are you keeping that relatively stable? I think that's a good, if it's stable, that means you're probably eating nutrient dense, high quality foods for the most part. I think the other piece to that, I think that's quite critical that people don't consider is just the timing of those meals. That actually has a pretty strong influence on, if you eat a big meal close to bedtime, for example, that especially one that maybe is going to create a lot of, blood glucose variability, that might be something that you just need to kind of reconsider, because we see a pretty strong relationship in our data between timing of meal and how that influences sleep, and also massive influence on heart rate variability.
What's the best time to stop eating?
3 hours before bed, generally. Your body can't, both, sleep and digestion are parasympathetic activities. So, and your body is going to default to digestion. So it can't do both at the same time. So obviously you can sleep, but it's not going to be quality sleep. So the front end of your sleep is going to be less quality because your body is forced to kind of digest this really big, heavy meal. So anything close to bed, you want it to be highly bioavailable. Like, again, something that your body doesn't have to really prioritize. It can digest very easily, and it can get back to the business of restorative sleep. So that's a really big piece on the sleep. And then hydration, water really influences heart rate variability. So making sure that you're drinking plenty of water throughout the day is really important. And then on the psychological side, and I think this is to your earlier point, we kind of think a lot about the physiology as it relates to our ability to adapt functionally to our environment, but don't always consider the psychological aspect. And I think it's the psychological piece is a little bit tougher to quantify, right? I think that's why we hang our hat on the physiological stuff, because that's just easier to quantify, right?
Sure.
But it's the psychological stuff that takes, kind of the work, right? The interior work to really understand, what that landscape looks like for you, and ensuring that you are you're taking care of your psychological needs, right? And I think it's not, I think as human beings, like, we don't have a lot of needs, right? When we really boil it down, it's, do I feel a sense of purpose? Do I have the efficacy? Do I feel like I have the skills and resources to do what's asked of me, as a parent, as a daughter, as a sister, as a employee, as a business owner, that's called self-efficacy. Do I have the skills and resources to do what's asked of me? And then the third core need is really, do I have a sense of control and autonomy over my life? And so if we think about those as just 6 things that we need that are really the core influencers on our heart rate variability, which then kind of is the marker that helps us understand how functionally we're going to be able to adapt to our environment. So that's kind of like the mental model or the framework I think people can use to think about their overall health and well-being.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And I know that the average person doesn't necessarily have total control or as much control over potentially how they manage their time or their performance as like a professional athlete whose entire job is oriented around doing that. Yeah. But really, that is the job that all of us have if we want to be the very best at what we do, whether that's being, a parent, a spouse, someone at work, whatever the case may be. So again, like, this is pretty broad, but like, what do the people who are the world's best at managing performance do that average people should be doing more of? And you talked about some of these things. Like, clearly everybody should probably be more hydrated. They should stop eating 3 hours before bed, and they should try to sleep probably 8 hours a night, and tape your mouth shut. This is not medical advice, and I don't recommend that you do it, but it worked for me. But like, is there anything else that the average person should be doing that they might not be aware of, or that most people don't do?
Yeah, I think how we interact with light is really important. And I think that we probably don't talk about this enough. But one of those important cues our body takes in from the environment is that dictates how well we sleep at night, and when we release our first pulse of cortisol, and all sorts of all the biological processes that we need to have firing on all cylinders to really perform at our best. How we engage with light at the beginning of the day is really important. So within 20 minutes of waking up, prior to 9 a.m. generally, because the solar angle actually does really matter, we want to get our eyeballs out in the direct sunlight. It doesn't matter if it's cloudy, like, you need to get outside, and you need to get like almost 100,000 lux, which is light photon energy, prior to 9 a.m. Like, it's really, really important. And I don't think anyone like, very few people I think are thinking that intentionally. But when we consider what the mechanisms that really help facilitate longevity and our ability to engage in our environment, and our relationship to light is very important.
What does it take to get that much light for someone?
Yeah, it takes about 20 minutes outside would do it.
Okay.
I think. And you can have a combination of, outdoor light, like a bright ring light, I think is like maybe 1,500 lux potentially. And you're getting that, maybe every few minutes. It's, it just adds up. So a combination of, basically within 20 minutes, you want to really bathe yourself in light. That just tells your system that it's time to be alert. It's time to be awake. And that's going to set off, the cortisol pulse, which, is again, going to give you that little boost of energy. And then, your hormones know what, know what needs to be happening. Like, you've got all of these processes in the body that start to that take in that cue and then activate in a way that allows you to kind of have optimal mental, physical, and kind of emotional functioning. So light behavior is huge. And I think the other, and then, noon time frame, there's kind of like this concept, it's called the circadian dead zone. It's kind of the middle of the day where we're insensitive to light essentially, and it really has no major influence. But the next point in time where light becomes really important is when the sun is setting. And same sort of idea, that cue, there's nothing more powerful than like getting your eyeballs, on this as the sun is rising, and then as the sun is setting, again, to tell your system what the hell it needs to be doing in that moment, right? And the other piece is the food timing is also really important. Exercise timing is also really important, and can kind of help. Again, we want our body to be as regulated as possible. And by understanding how to interact with light, understanding, when to exercise, and understanding when to feed, those are three really important behaviors that, influence our biology at a cellular level.
And with light, I know a lot of people wear blue blocking glasses. I usually wear them during the day when I'm looking at screens. I'm not wearing them right now, but does that make a difference at night, or is there, it just seems like there's such mixed research on that right now. Like I still wear them, but I'm like, light's clearly like pouring in all around the edges of my glasses.
I mean, I think like for strain, potentially like the if there's a computer, like if you're on your computer and you find that the glasses kind of help alleviate like your strain, that's fine. But there's no, like, blue light during the day is completely fine. We want blue light. Yeah. Like it's like we're supposed to be alert and awake, and we shouldn't be blocking it. At night, however, once the sun goes down, that's when you really want to, try to create an absence of light as much as possible. And you should be dimming your house. Again, your body wants to wind down. So artificial lights are not helpful, and will end up, interfering with your sleep. You just won't get as quality of sleep if you're bathing yourself in all sorts of lights, in the lead up to bed. So within 3 hours of bedtime, generally speaking, you really want to dim the household environment, and avoid, screens. And in this case, I think, some blue light blocking glasses can be really effective in kind of helping mitigate the effect of light at that time.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. So what is the next frontier of human performance? Like, where do we go from here? What are the emerging areas of research that are going to be coming next?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, like I feel like we still don't have the foundation right. I think like people are always searching for, what can we do with, hopefully some sort of embedded, in the skin, some sort of embedded technology, would be really cool. Just basically like the sensors disappear, right? They're just in you and you can take in all of these inputs and be able to, better understand how to apply your effort. I think that's kind of the North Star. But honestly, like, I feel like people don't even have the foundation right. Like they don't understand how to interact with light. And I think there's a lot of opportunity, frankly, to build, to make that really accessible for folks and to quantify that, to your point, like how many lux do I get? How do I know if I've got enough photon energy, right, to really optimize my circadian biology? Because, I think this used to, like, if you think about it from an evolutionary perspective, like that all happened naturally for folks. But because we're in these artificial environments, we are so far from like what is actually healthy, because we're not, we can be literally in dark until noon if we wanted to, right? Because of the way things are set up. So I think helping people understand how to make these behaviors more accessible is, I think, the next step in technology, and providing coaching and feedback that's very consumable, very simple, and again, that helps people grasp onto the very simple things that they could be doing, that are frankly democratically available. I mean, they're free, right? I think then, okay, we create this foundation, then you can start to layer on enhancements, whether, I think of like supplements as like, in some ways as enhancements, right? Like don't do that stuff, or nootropics. Like, don't do that stuff until you actually have this foundation correct. Like, know when to exercise, know when you should be eating, understand, what the feeding window should actually look like. Generally speaking, we should only really be eating when the sun's out. Like, we shouldn't be eating at all when it's dark, right? Like, and again, like, if you think about this from an evolutionary perspective, it makes a ton of sense. But I think technology to kind of enable, these behaviors that are going to help us adapt to our environment in the most functional way, and allow us to live our values with as much, joy and energy as possible. I mean, that to me, what technology should be helping facilitate.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about this, but technology has ushered us into a post-human era from a behavioral standpoint, and now technology can move us back towards like our natural homeostasis, right? Like everything.
Oh, perfectly said. Yeah, exactly. Just getting us back to like the simple behaviors, that were that it's crazy how far we've come from like nature, and just being and living in kind of our natural state. So yeah, I mean, I think it's super ironic, that kind of technology I think is going to be the path to help us back there. And that's just my vision, but that's to me like why I joined Whoop 5 years ago, and why I wake up every day is to try to hopefully create an experience where we understand, what these behaviors are that can really, help us live a life of, more peace and joy. Yeah.
Yeah. More peace, more joy.
Peace.
Yeah.
Peace. I know.
Yeah.
Right.
No, that sounds awesome. And so Kristin, thanks so much for taking time to chat today. And if people want to learn more about you or more about the work that you're doing, where should they go?
Yeah, I always post if there's anything kind of relevant related to the research that we're doing or new studies that I find interesting. LinkedIn, I guess, just Kristin Holmes. You can find me there. Every now and again, I'll post some nonsense on Instagram. Kristen_Holmes 2126. And that's basically. Oh, and I recently joined Clubhouse, so I definitely will have. I have some pretty cool ones, little things coming up. I literally don't even know what Clubhouse is really. I just joined, but
no one does yet, but yeah.
Okay, good. Yeah. So I have one coming up with the director of performance for the New York Knicks, Erwin Valencia. He's like, I don't even know how to like market that. I don't know. Anyway. And then with Dr. Meeta Singh, she's a sleep scientist and has done a ton of work in the professional space, and we intersect a lot. So those are a couple Clubhouse things coming up, and I'm just Kristin Holmes, I guess, on that.
Okay. Awesome. Kristin, thanks so much. Really enjoyed chatting with you.
This is awesome, Andrew. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Through Choose the Hard Way, I hope to empower more people to reach beyond who they think they are and just keep going, no matter what they encounter in life, so that they can reach their goals and dreams. You can help me make it happen when you take a moment to subscribe to Choose the Hard Way, leave a review, and rate the show on iTunes or wherever you listen. It only takes 30 seconds. I truly appreciate it, and so will the people who you help to find the show. You can also sign up for the Choose the Hard Way newsletter to get more information about episodes, guests, and other awesome things when you go to choosethehardway.com/newsletter. You are what you overcome. Choose the hard way.